Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a board game that tries to do something pretty much impossible, put one of modern history's most complex and misunderstood conflicts into a box. This is Vietnam, 1965-1975.
Now, right off the bat, this isn't your typical war game, just pushing little plastic soldiers around and rolling dice. The whole point of this game is to simulate both the brutal military side and the constantly shifting political landscape that really define the whole thing. It's a seriously deep dive into the strategic headaches that haunted commanders on both sides.
And that leads to this huge design problem, right? The Vietnam War just wasn't like World War II. There were no clean battle lines advancing across a map. For the American forces, the biggest challenge wasn't even about taking territory, it was just finding the enemy. So, how on earth do you turn that into a board game?
Okay, let's get into the guts of it. The game's answer is this really clever core mechanic they call the operation. And trust me, this one idea shapes the entire experience.
See, the designers totally got that. Historically speaking, the war wasn't fought along some continuous front. It was all about these specific, targeted actions. So instead of having a turn where you move your whole army, the game is built around launching these individual operations.
So what does that actually mean when you're playing? Well, it means on your turn, you're not just, pushing all your pieces forward. You are declaring a very specific mission. You're committing a specific group of soldiers to one single goal. Maybe it's attacking one spot, maybe it's clearing a road, who knows?
And yeah, these operations are pulled straight from the history books. You can launch these aggressive search and destroy missions, which are all about just finding and fighting the enemy. Or if you're playing as the Allies, you can run a clear and secure operation, which is less about just fighting and more about trying to establish some long-term control over an area.
Okay, so you have these operations, but who kicks them off? Who gets to decide when and where the action happens? This is where we get into the real heart of the war's asymmetry, the fact that both sides were fighting a completely different kind of war. And the game models this brilliantly.
And this mechanic, wow, it just perfectly captures the core dynamic of the conflict. Historically, the National Liberation Front, the NLF, and the North Vietnamese forces, they were the ones who usually dictated the time and place of an engagement. The game reflects this by literally giving the NLF player control over the game's tempo.
And this back and forth is what creates the entire rhythm of the game. It's fascinating. At the start of a round, the NLF player gets to point their finger and either say, okay, you go, forcing the Allied player to do something, or they say, nope, I go, and launch their own operation. It creates this incredibly tense cat-and-mouse feeling. The Allied player has all this firepower, but they can't always use it when and where they want to.
But here's the thing, the fighting, that's only a piece of the puzzle. This simulation goes way beyond just the firefights in the jungle to model the other critical fronts that really ultimately decided the outcome of the war.
So let's take a look at the map, because this is where it all comes together. You can see it's not just some grid with mountains and jungles. No, this is a detailed political landscape, broken up into these core zones and individual provinces, and each one has its own population. This is where the battle for hearts and minds happens.
And that's because you are constantly juggling 4 different fronts, all at the same time. You've got the military front, obviously, but then there's pacification, that's trying to win over the local population. Then there's politics, you have to keep the fragile South Vietnamese government from collapsing. And finally, there's morale, your own country's will to keep fighting. You neglect any one of those, and guess what? You can be winning every single battle on the map and still lose the entire war.
I mean, the amount of detail you have to track here is it's incredible. You're not just looking at troop strength. You're trying to manage the loyalty of individual South Vietnamese leaders. You're watching the flow of supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You're tracking popular support in every single province. Literally every decision you make sends ripples across all these different systems.
So, okay, when you mix all of this together, you've got the operations, the NLF controlling the tempo, this crazy multi-layered political struggle. What kind of game does that actually create?
What you get is a game that's making a really powerful point. It's saying that victory here, it isn't about grabbing land or capturing the enemy capital. You win by shattering your opponent's will to keep going. For the NLF player, it's all about making the war so painful that American morale at home just collapses. And for the Allies, it's a race against time to crush the insurgency and stabilize South Vietnam before their own public support completely runs out.
So in the end, this game is doing so much more than just letting you replay historical battles. It's actually forcing you, as the player, to wrestle with the exact same agonizing, maybe even impossible strategic dilemmas that the real commanders and politicians faced. It's not just a war in a box, it's a question in a box. And it's a question that feels just as relevant today as it did 50 years ago.